August, 1976. Halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis suddenly raised a hand. The band froze. 12,000 people in the Civic Center fell silent. In the front row, a woman clutched a folded photo, her hands shaking. Stories like this remind us that music can heal in ways nothing else can. If you believe kindness still matters, stick with me, this night will stay with you long after the last note. The brass section was bright and sharp, the bass thumping steady under the roar of applause. It was August, 1976, and the Civic Center glowed in gold stage light. Elvis was halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love when something in the front row caught his eye. The woman was still, not clapping, not singing. She wore a black dress, simple but neat, like it had been pressed carefully that morning. Her hair was set in tight curls, but her eyes, red and tired, were locked on him. On her lap sat a small cardboard sign, handwritten in bold black marker, "For Jim, our son." In her hands she clutched a creased photograph. Elvis hit the next note, but his voice dipped, just enough that the band leader glanced over. He took a breath, glanced back at her. The picture shook slightly in her grip. He felt it in his gut before he understood it. Something was wrong. The horns swelled for the next measure, but Elvis stepped back from the microphone. The crowd kept singing without him, but their voices softened, sensing a change. He looked again. The woman's gaze didn't waver. Behind her, a young couple swayed to the music. Beside her, an empty seat. He missed his cue. The pianist's fingers hesitated. A thin hiss from the amp filled the gap. Elvis raised his left hand, palm out. It was a gesture his band knew well. Stop. The drums faded. The horns went quiet. Even the backup singers froze mid-note. The arena's roar collapsed into silence, broken only by a cough from somewhere in the back. Programs rustled as thousands of people shifted in their seats. The spotlight followed him as he stepped toward the edge of the stage, scanning the rows like he was searching for someone he'd lost. He could see the photo more clearly now. A man in military dress uniform, standing stiff and proud, something in his chest tightened. Elvis turned, gave a quick nod to his security man, then started down the steps at stage left. His white suit caught the light, sequins scattering flecks across the dark floor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People craned their necks to see where he was going. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" He moved with purpose, each step bringing him closer to the first row, closer to her. A man in the third row reached out for a handshake, but Elvis barely glanced his way. His focus stayed locked on the woman in black, still holding that photograph like it might break if she loosened her finger. By now the room was so quiet you could hear the faint squeak of his shoes on the polished floor. He stopped just a few feet away from her. The crowd held its breath, and then he spoke. What made him step down from the stage in the middle of his signature song? The beam of the spotlight followed Elvis as he closed the last few feet between them. Security shifted at the edges of the aisle, ready to intervene if needed, but no one in the audience moved. It was so quiet you could hear the faint hum from the stage monitor. Somewhere, a folding chair creaked. Elvis crouched down so he was level with her. The photograph rested against her lap, her fingers curling protectively around its edges. Up close, he could see the faded color. The uniform's green had dulled to olive, the metal ribbons blurred at the edges. "Ma'am," his voice was low, steady, but not the showman's voice. This was a man's voice. A private one. "Is that your husband?" She swallowed hard, blinked back tears and nodded. "We were supposed to be here together," she whispered. Her words broke in the middle, like she was fighting to get them out. Elvis didn't move for a beat. Then gently, he reached forward. His fingers brushed hers as he took the photograph, careful not to bend it. He held it just long enough to really look into the man's eyes, frozen forever in that portrait. Witnesses recall a change in Elvis's face. His jaw set, his brows drew down just slightly. "Then tonight," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard in the front rows. "He's here with us." The crowd reacted like one body, a soft gasp, a ripple of emotion moving outward. In the back someone called, "We love you, Elvis," but the words didn't break the moment. The rest of the room seemed to shush itself. He handed the photo back. She took it in both hands, pressing it to her chest. Elvis glanced up toward the stage. The band was still frozen, instruments poised. The horn players looked unsure. The pianist rested his hands lightly on the keys, waiting for the signal. But Elvis didn't give it, not yet. Instead, he stayed there, crouched on the arena floor in a white suit glittering under the light, face to face with a woman who had lost the person she most wanted beside her. He spoke again, quieter this time. "What's his name?" "Jim," she managed. Elvis nodded once, as if committing it to memory. Then he stood, slowly. The tension in the air didn't break. If anything, it deepened. Thousands of eyes tracked his every move. Without a word to the band, he turned and walked the few steps to the stage railing. He didn't climb up. He sat on the edge, legs dangling, the hem of his suit brushing the crowd barrier. The photo was still on her lap. Her eyes were still on him. Elvis gave a subtle hand signal toward the piano. One note rang out. Low, soft. The rest of the band didn't join in. Not yet. What will he do next with the entire audience watching? The first notes from the piano floated out into the silence. Slow, unhurried, and lower than the recorded version. The audience knew the melody instantly, but there was no cheer, no whistle, just stillness. Elvis leaned forward slightly, his eyes still on Mary. Witnesses say it was like the crowd wasn't even there, just the two of them. A piano and the memory of the man in the photograph. He started singing "Love Me Tender," but softer, almost spoken. The sound of his voice didn't rush to fill the room. It seemed to fold into it, warm but fragile. The mic caught every breath between lines. Mary's lips trembled. Her hands stayed in her lap, clutching the picture. The seat beside her, empty, felt heavier in that moment than any chair could. A woman 2 rows behind dabbed her eyes with a crumpled tissue. A man on the aisle leaned forward, elbows on knees, not wanting to miss a second. By the second line, the spotlight widened just enough to include Mary, her face lit in soft gold. The camera operators at the back, sensing the moment, kept their lenses tight on the two of them. Halfway through the verse, Elvis's voice caught, so subtly most wouldn't notice. But those close to the stage felt it. He steadied himself, holding the note just a breath longer than usual. He reached into his pocket. Out came a pale silk scarf, folded neatly. The light caught it, making it almost glow. Without breaking the song, Elvis slid down from the stage rail and stepped toward her. He placed the scarf gently in her lap. "For you and Jim," he said quietly into the mic. That was when the arena broke, not in wild cheers but in an almost reverent applause. A wave that rolled forward from the cheap seats. Soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the upper rows a voice called out, "God bless you." But it faded quickly into the warmth of the clapping. Mary's eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, she mouthed something. Witnesses say it might have been "thank you." But no one could hear over the gentle roar of the crowd. Elvis nodded once, then took a single step back, giving her space. But he didn't turn to leave. Instead, he stood there, microphone lowered, letting the band play through the final few notes of the verse. And then he did something unexpected. Instead of signaling the band to move into the next song, he looked out across the crowd and said, "Let's all sing this one for that." The pianist started the verse again, and this time 12,000 voices joined in. Some on key, some not. But it didn't matter. The sound filled every inch of the civic center. Mary's head tilted slightly toward the empty seat beside her, as though she were listening for a voice only she could hear. When the last line ended, Elvis touched the brim of an imaginary hat. A small, old-fashioned gesture of respect. Then he stepped back toward the stage stairs. The crowd thought that was the end of it. But as Elvis climbed the steps, he turned to Mary one last time. Something in his eyes said the moment wasn't finished. The crowd thinks the moment is over, but Elvis isn't done. Elvis didn't walk straight back to the microphone. Instead, he turned down the far side of the stage and stepped into the aisle, motioning for Mary to follow. Security parted the crowd just enough for her to pass. She clutched the scarf in one hand, the photograph in the other. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant, but Elvis kept looking back, making sure she stayed close. When they reached the edge of the stage, he offered his arm. She took it. He guided her up the small set of stairs into the side wing, away from the crowd's direct view. Stagehands stood frozen, holding cables, unsure if they should look away. The low thrum of the stage monitors filled the quiet space. Elvis stopped near a folding chair and crouched again so they were eye to eye. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You're not alone tonight," he told her. "Not while I'm here." Mary's face crumpled for just a moment. She nodded, unable to speak. A stagehand appeared with a paper cup of water. Elvis took it, pressed it gently into her free hand. Then he reached for the scarf she held. Turning it over, he pulled a thick black marker from a side table and signed the back in bold, steady strokes. He set the scarf back in her lap, then took the framed photograph and, with the same care, signed along the wooden edge. "Elvis Presley, front row's yours anytime you want it," he said, holding her gaze until she nodded again. In that dim corner of the stage, it was just the two of them, no spotlight, no cheering. Just a man making a promise. Finally he stood, gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, and motioned for one of his crew to guide her back toward her seat. She went without protest, scarf and photo held tight to her chest. Elvis took a deep breath before stepping back into the glare of the stage light. The crowd roared in relief at his return. He raised a hand to quiet them. "We got a lot of songs left tonight," he said into the mic, his voice warm but serious. "But I needed to make sure we sang that one for the right people." The applause that followed wasn't the usual explosive cheer. It was slower, deeper, a gratitude you could feel in your chest. Somewhere in the back, someone shouted, "That's why we love you." Elvis smiled faintly, adjusted the mic stand, and nodded to the band. The next song kicked in, upbeat and bright. But for Mary, the night's most important moment had already passed. A week later, something arrives at her door. 7 days after the concert, Mary was in her kitchen, making tea, when she heard the thump of a delivery on her front porch. The sound startled her. She wasn't expecting anything. Through the thin lace curtain she saw a large cardboard box resting just outside the screen door. No return address she recognized, just bold black letters. "Fragile." She pulled the door open. The late morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. The box was heavier than it looked. She dragged it inside, set it on the dining table, and went to find a knife. Her daughter, who had been staying over since the concert, wandered in. "What is it?" she asked. Mary shrugged, cutting through the tape. The flaps opened to reveal a soft, protective cloth wrapped around something solid. She peeled it back. Her breath caught. It was a sunburst acoustic guitar, the wood rich and glossy under the light from the window. Across the front, written in careful gold ink, "For Jim and Mary." Mary's hands hovered over it but didn't touch. Her daughter reached in, lifting a small envelope tucked under the guitar string. Inside, on thick cream stationery, was a note handwritten in bold, familiar letters. "You'll always have a seat in the front row. Elvis." The paper trembled in her hand. She set it down gently beside the guitar, then pulled the scarf from the back of a nearby chair. It was still neatly folded from the night he'd given it to her. She laid it next to the note, the 3 items forming a silent tableau of that evening. Neither she nor her daughter spoke for a long moment. Outside, a car rolled by. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The ordinary sounds made the moment feel even more surreal. Mary finally reached out and rested her palm lightly on the guitar's body. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Her daughter nodded. "He didn't have to do this." Mary's eyes stayed on the gold lettering. "No," she said. "He didn't." According to her family, she placed the guitar in their living room, right beside her late husband's favorite armchair. She never played it, never even moved it, except to dust. The scarf stayed folded, the note tucked safely inside its envelope. The three objects became a kind of private shrine, not to Elvis himself, but to the kindness he'd shown, and to the man she'd lost. Friends who visited over the years sometimes asked about the guitar, assuming it was a collector's piece. Mary would smile faintly and say, "It's not for playing," and if they pressed, she'd tell the story slowly, without embellishment, about a night when the music stopped for just one person in a crowd of thousands. She'd always end the same way. It wasn't about him being famous. It was about him being human. Years later, the family would still have every single piece of that night, and the story would live on in ways even Elvis couldn't have imagined. Decades passed. The guitar's wood darkened slightly with age, but the gold ink stayed bright. The scarf remained folded exactly as it had been the night Elvis placed it in Mary's lap. The ticket stub from that concert, creased and faded, sat in a small frame on the shelf beside them. Mary never treated them as trophies. She treated them as promises. To her, the items weren't about value or fame. They were proof that kindness could cross a stage, stop a performance, and reach one person in the middle of 12,000. Local newspapers covered the story briefly in the months after the concert. A few fans wrote letters saying they'd been in the crowd that night, but most of the story's life came from word of mouth told at family gatherings, whispered at church socials, passed down like a treasured family photograph. Mary's daughter recalled how her mother would retell it without drama. She never made herself the center, she said. It was always about how he noticed, how he cared enough to stop. In later years, when Mary's grandchildren were old enough to ask about the guitar in the corner, she'd let them look but not touch. She'd point to the gold writing and say, "This was for your grandpa and me," because Elvis knew that night wasn't about him, it was about us. Even as time moved on and Elvis himself became part of history, the memory stayed vivid for her. She could still recall the hush in the Civic Center, the warmth of his hand as he took the photograph, the way his voice dropped when he said, "Then tonight he's here with us." And maybe that was the real legacy. How a single moment of attention, a single act of compassion, could leave a mark deeper than any hit song or sold-out show. When Mary passed, her family kept the guitar, scarf and ticket stub together. They didn't sell them. They didn't lock them away. They kept them in the living room, right where she had placed them all those years ago, so anyone who visited could see and ask. And when they did, her children would tell the story the way she always had. Slowly, honest, with the same ending line every time. It wasn't about Elvis being a star. It was about him being human. Sometimes the most unforgettable performances aren't in the songs. They're in the moments when the music stops. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unforgettable act of compassion you've ever witnessed?